When we think of George Orwell's 1984, we almost always think of one thing: the ultimate story of political totalitarianism, a boot stamping on a human face forever. But what if that's only half the story? What if Orwell's real target wasn't just the state, but the church? So let's just dive right into that idea. We all know the book as a political satire, something we probably all read in school. But what if it's also a profound, and maybe even a deeply personal, critique of organized religion? What if Big Brother isn't just some dictator? What if he's actually a god? Let's take a look at the evidence. Okay, so to really unpack this, we need to start with the very foundation of Orwell's world. And you know what? The clues aren't even buried that deep. They're right there, in the fundamental design of Oceania itself. First, just look at the world map in 1984. It's split into three massive, perpetually warring superstates: Oceania, Eurasia, and Eastasia. Now, does that remind you of anything? It's a pretty striking parallel to the three major Abrahamic faiths: Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, which, let's be honest, have been in conflict with one another throughout so much of history. Coincidence? Maybe, but it's a pretty big one. And then you've got the most famous line from the entire book: Big Brother is watching you. We always read that as pure, terrifying surveillance. But what if we look at it through a religious lens? The phrase, God is all-seeing, is often meant to be a comfort, right? A promise of divine protection. The party brilliantly hijacks that exact same idea and just twists it into the ultimate tool of control. This religious structure, it isn't just an idea. It's baked right into the social pyramid of Oceania. At the very top, you have Big Brother, who's basically an untouchable god. Right below him, you've got the inner party. They're the tiny 2% elite, and they act as the priesthood. Then comes the outer party, the 13%, who are the true believers, the faithful. And at the very bottom, the pearls, all 85% of them. They're essentially the unbelievers, left completely outside this system of faith. But it goes even deeper than just the org chart. The party's methods of control are incredibly ritualistic. They're designed to mimic the sacraments and practices you'd find in any organized religion. See, it's not just about power, it's about a twisted, manufactured form of salvation. Think about those televised confessions of the so-called traitors. They get up there, they publicly admit to all these fabricated crimes, and then they're forgiven. Now, how different is that, really, from a sinner confessing their sins to a priest to be absolved? It's the exact same psychological playbook, just repurposed for political gain. And we see this path to purity play out perfectly with Winston's torture. It's not just punishment, it's a full-blown sacrament. It starts with penance for his thought crimes. Then it moves to mortification, the physical pain that's meant to purify him. And it all leads to the final step: restoration, where his soul is finally made pure and he's returned to the loving faith of the party. And if you had any doubt at all about this, Orwell basically hits us over the head with it. He puts the words directly into the mouth of Winston's torturer, O'Brien. O'Brien doesn't say, "We are the enforcers" or "the guardians." No, he says, "We are the priests of power." He literally defines their role as a religious one, with power as their one and only god. Even Room 101, the most terrifying place in the whole novel, fits this model perfectly. It's not just a torture chamber. Its real purpose is to purge the mind, to purify the soul of its sins against the party. It's like something straight out of Dante's Inferno, a personalized hell designed to burn away every last bit of heresy until all that's left is pure, unquestioning love for Big Brother. Okay, so you might be thinking, this is all just some clever literary analysis, right? Did Orwell actually mean for us to see all this? Well, to answer that, we really have to look at the man himself, because his own life offers some pretty compelling clues that this critique was very, very personal. You see, Orwell wasn't born a critic of religion. He was actually raised in the Anglican faith. But his disillusionment started pretty early. By the time he was just 14, he was already writing about his deep resentment. But the real turning point was the Spanish Civil War. That's where he saw, with his own eyes, the Catholic Church siding with fascist dictators against the people. And that experience solidified his beliefs for the rest of his life, leading him to identify as an atheist who was deeply skeptical of all organized religion. And you don't have to take my word for it. These are Orwell's own words from his essay reflecting on his childhood. This shows it wasn't just some passive disbelief. For him, it was an active, passionate opposition to the very idea of a divine, unquestionable authority. So for Orwell, after everything he'd seen in Spain, this wasn't an academic debate. He no longer saw the church as just a spiritual institution. He saw it as another totalitarian system, an authoritarian regime that demanded the same kind of blind faith as any dictator, and one that stood as a direct enemy to intellectual freedom. So let's get to the big question. Why does any of this matter? Why is reframing 1984 as a critique of religion so important? Well, because it uncovers what might be the book's deepest, most timeless warning, one that goes way beyond any single political system. Here it is. This was Orwell's great fear. He believed that once a population learns the habit of unquestioning faith, that habit of just surrendering your critical thought, that reflex can be exploited. It becomes incredibly easy to just swap out the idol. The worship that was once directed at a god can be just as easily redirected to a state, a political party, or a charismatic leader. And that leaves us with one final chilling question. When any organization, whether it calls itself a church or a political party, demands your total submission, purges anyone who disagrees, and claims to be the one and only source of truth, what's the difference, really? Hasn't it already become a religion in its own right? That's the question Orwell leaves us to wrestle with.